Hey, so with the upcoming release of the brand new James Gunn Superman movie, I want to go ahead and give my quick thoughts. I don't know how quick it's going to be, but I want to give my thoughts on some of the Superman movies coming out beforehand. And so far, I've already done reviews for both Superman and the Mole Man, as well as the 1975 production of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, the musical. Um, Starting right now, we're going to be diving into the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. And we're starting with the first film released in 1978, Superman the movie. And one thing I need to say for context before I get started with the review is something that I'll elaborate on more when I get more as I go on, especially with Superman 2. Um, and as well as Superman 3 and Superman 4, The Question Piece. Um, but for the most part, there is a large portion of these movies, of Superman movies, that are first time watches for me. And the Christopher Reeve era of Superman the movie, Superman 2, Superman 3, and Superman 4, The Question Piece. Um, Supergirl, I guess you could kind of count in that era because it was a semi kind of sort of spin off of that era. This is the first time watch of any of those. Previous to this review series, my knowledge of Superman was I watched, I had seen bits and pieces of Superman the animated series, and I had seen, I followed through the majority of the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe that was like the Zack Snyder like recent run of from Man of Steel to I think Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was the last one that came out of that era. I've seen all of those, and so for me personally, there was that, and then a few years back, I watched for the first time Superman and the Mole Man, which was the first time we got Christopher Reeve. It was both the first time we got Christopher Reeves, not Christopher Reeves, that we got George Reeves as Superman before he did the Adventures of Superman TV show. And apparently, I was doing some research into it, and the TV show actually took the movie and re-edited it into a three-part episode of Superman and Old Man. But also, that was the first, in my opinion, I believe that was the first major comic book movie that we had gotten from either DC or Marvel of like a full like hour and a half, like an hour and a half type movie from either of those companies. But I already have a review out for that movie. Right now we're talking about Christopher Reeve. Um, so yeah, I've been I've been hearing a lot about the Christopher Reeve Superman movies over the years. Uh, there's like there's definitely like I've always been aware of it, but I've never actually sat down and watched any of them. And to an extent, there's always been a little bit of a hesitation because as somebody who mostly their knowledge of Superman is the Henry Cavill version of kind of like Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, um, the Justice League, whether or not you're talking about a Joss Whedon version or the Zack Snyder version. That is basically my um, exposure to Superman. Uh, I don't even know too many of the comics. Like I just recently picked up the DC has a line of comics they're doing that is called DC Compact Comics, where you can kind of see like right here up in the corner, to where essentially it's like a bunch of It is a line based off of, like taking classic, like DC comics and re-releasing them, but in a smaller format to where they're like more like each of these is like $10. Uh, yeah, it's if you see right here, it's like it's $10 in the U.S. and then if you're in Canada, it's like $14. This is All Star Superman, normally talked about as one of the best versions of Superman, like one of the best Superman comics. But I haven't had a chance to read it yet. Um, but yeah, I don't have that much exposure to Superman in general, and so when I got ready to finally like dive deeper into the Christopher Reeves films, I was a little nervous because it's like I grew up on the Adam West Batman TV show and the Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk show, and so one of my favorite Marvel films is the 1986 Howard the Duck movie. I know that movie has its fair share of flaws, and like it is absolutely a guilty pleasure movie for sure. Like there's no denying that. But for whatever reason, I just never got the urge to look into the Superman movies. And to an extent, I just, for the longest time, I didn't really have much interest in Superman. Like, the concept of Superman himself just didn't really appeal to me all that much. And I've slowly gained more appreciation for the character over the years. And he's become a character that I've been more intrigued in and more interested in, and more like, okay, let's see what you can do with this character. Like, there's something here. But for the most part, like like I said, like um, didn't know very much about character. He just didn't interest me. I was always more of a like, in contrast, like someone like Batman. Like, there's very little of Batman that I've actually seen, that I actually haven't seen, to where like like I've seen the 1960s TV series, and like the Michael Keaton, Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher, Val Kilmer, George Clooney era of like the Dark Knight trilogy. Like I've seen more of Batman the animated series than I have Superman the animated series, and like even in regards to comics, like like stuff like Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, um, Gotham by Gaslight. Like those are just more intriguing stories to me personally. But yeah, dealing with Superman in general, uh, it just took a while before I wanted to start deep diving into it. And when I heard about the new movie coming out, I'm like, you know what? I think it's time to finally go ahead and you know deep dive into this character and really just kind of like kind of sink my teeth in and be like, okay, let's see, like because this is actually considered by many to be one of the best superhero movies of all time. Especially the first movie, Superman the movie, is considered one of the best. Uh, it is, for those of you who don't know, it is largely considered as Superman the movie is, at least for the phase 1 through 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the head of Marvel Studios who ran that universe, Kevin Feige, made it mandatory that like him and a bunch of the main crew and production company that was working on that every time they got ready to start a new superhero, a new entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that they would rewatch Superman the movie and take notes because it's just that influential. And I will say personally that I had a decent amount of fun with this. I thought it was really fun, and it definitely has its charm. And I understand like I absolutely understand how some people can have this at the top of their list, and absolutely think this is one of the best superhero movies of all time. I will say that personally, uh, think that personally for Superman the movie, and I'll expand more of my thoughts on Superman 2 when I get to that video. But Superman the movie and Superman 2, uh, I respect the movies and the legacy of them more than I personally enjoy them. And that's not to say that Superman the movie doesn't have any enjoyable factors in it. Like I think Christopher Reeve of like at bare minimum, like it's hard to deny that Christopher Reeve, like he plays like a classic Superman. Like he just like when you have Christopher Reeve show up as Superman and like he just embodies the character and just like just this very hopeful, uplifting, and just like like calming like symbol of truth, justice in the American way. Like his portrayal of Superman is very solid, and I really enjoy it. Um, and likewise, you have Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. I think he doesn't. I think he overall does a pretty decent job. There's a bit of they still have a little bit of where Lex Luthor was originally a villain named Luthor in the comics. That was essentially a mad scientist role. And you can see in these movies of the Christopher Reeve era that they're still trying to kind of transition for where they don't necessarily want him to still be a mad scientist, version of a villain. But still, the way that he is implemented as a villain is still kind of its own kind of flavor of still having that kind of in there. Like his whole scheme in this movie and pretty much anytime that he shows up. Whether or not you're talking about Superman, Superman 2, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, or even when he comes back in Superman Returns, is real estate. They double down on the idea of like somebody like Lex Luthor would be like he would have value in real estate because of the monetary potential, and there's interesting stuff done with that. It's an intriguing enough thing. But at the same time, like as somebody who's watching this for the first time in 2025, it's also uh, like the big bad of the movie, like his whole plot revolves around real estate, and it's a little corny, and sometimes it's kind of like a charming, kind of charismatic corny, and sometimes it's like kind of like almost on the verge of rolling your eyes, like okay, this is kind of taking it a little bit too far. Of they're definitely not doing the. It doesn't have the same kind of cheesy camp undertones like something like the Adam West Batman TV series, to where that was very much diving into like the campy, zany, like Biff Bam Pow, version of DC Comics and Batman and stuff. It's not going that far, but at the same time, it's not as serious and as it still has some moments to where it gets a little bit too much like are you sure you're not trying to incorporate elements of like the more campy era of Superman, because this is kind of it's a little silly. um I will say that I think Margot Kidder does a very good job as Lois Lane. I enjoy her version of Lois Lane. uh so far out of the versions of Lois that I've seen, uh, I've seen Lois now in the Christopher Reeve Superman quadrilogy. I've seen, um, I think Kate Bosworth is her name in Superman Returns, and then the Lois Lane that we get in films like Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and the Justice League movies, Amy Adams. And and then of course you have like Leslie Ann Warren in like the 1975 musical. Overall, so far, as of right now, I would say that the that Margot Kidder is probably my preferred Lois Lane. Uh, that I just like the way that they handle her to where she's no nonsense. Like she is very much a character that is very straightforward and to the point. And there's a few moments where that gets slightly irritating, but overall, like you understand, like why this is a character that is somebody who is in the position she is at the Daily Planet, why she is one of the top reporters before Clark Kent gets there, and yeah, overall, like it's just like it works really well. She does a very even in the she's written out of Superman 3 to where she has like a brief cameo appearance at the very beginning, and she ends up being like she ends up going to like Australia or something. Uh, there's something that happens where like I don't know if it's scheduling conflicts or something, but for the most part, when she appears in Superman the movie, Superman 2, and Superman 4: Quest for Peace, even in the worst of those, she does a solid job, and I enjoy seeing her. She's an enjoyable performance, and Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve have some of the best chemistry I've seen in a comic movie. I will say that they have very like you absolutely buy into both the idea of why Lois Lane is so infatuated with Superman, and you also understand why, on the flip side of that, why Superman would have this, like, why he would be so enamored with somebody like Lois Lane. Like, it makes sense, and it's done in a way that, like, it works. Like, the chemistry there is very believable, and it's interesting seeing how the relationship develops between the two of them. Likewise, as far as like the score goes, I think the John Williams score is probably one of the best. That like it's one of those comic book scores that is kind of like up there with like like the Danny Elfman Batman '89 theme, to where it's just a classic iconic score to where you just you play like the first like you know three 3 to 5 seconds of the score of Superman the movie, and that score is just almost instantly recognizable. Like even if you haven't seen Superman the movie and you haven't seen any of Christopher Reeve's films, like that score by John Williams is just like it's an iconic score that just like encapsulates the vibe and the energy of that Superman, and yeah, it's just something that stands out and is just something that is just it's so iconic to the fact that like when James Gunn was doing when he's doing his Superman movie, that you end up getting a trailer for the new Superman movie coming out, and they actually did kind of like a rock guitar kind of riff on that score because it's just one of those scores that is just iconic. Like it's just one of those scores that is just like it just like automatically, if nothing else, like it sticks in your head, and it's just that kind of like. But yeah, just like it just has, and it's uplifting. Like it's something that like even in the worst films, when you get into even some of like the lesser films in this franchise, it still works and has like a very like it's just uplifting. It's something that like puts a smile on your face when you hear it because it's just something that is like I said, it's iconic. The one thing I will say that kind of holds this movie back slightly for me as somebody watching it for the first, and keep in mind this is me watching it the first time, than a 1978 version of Superman. This is my first time viewing first, so don't come after me in the comments. as a first time watch of a 1978 Superman movie in 2025, I will say the pacing is kind of an issue, at least for the first half of the movie. Um, Once you actually get to Metropolis and you have like Clark Kent Superman, you have Clark Kent at Daily Planet, and you have Superman. You're introducing Lois Lane, Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, and you're starting to like explore that a little bit. The pacing overall, when you get to that point, spot on, handled really well. But the issue with the pacing for that is that it just takes so long to get to really get to the point. Like I understand to an extent that that you do have to you have to establish like the original origin of Krypton is going to explode and Superman has to be sent out in a shuttle and he has to land on Earth and you have to have a little bit there with Martha and Jonathan Kent. They find this crashed spacecraft and they're like, okay, like there's a child here, like we're not gonna leave this child by himself. Like we're gonna raise this child as our own. And you do want to get to see a little bit of like Clark Kent in Smallville and kind of get a little bit of his value set. And that's not really the issue. Um, the big issue for me personally is that like it's about 45 minutes to an hour into the movie that is just like uh, the entire first act, like the entire half of the first act, is like you spend probably a good 15-20 minutes bare minimum just on Krypton, and like there's like a 5 minutes, 5-10 minute segment that is just on the trial of General Zod and his two companions that are like like his henchmen, and it feels more like they were just like, okay, well we have to have this here to set up Superman 2 because Superman the movie and Superman 2 were filmed back to back initially, and Richard Donner actually finished like about 70-80% of Superman 2 before they were like, you know what, we're taking too long. We need to just go ahead and focus on Superman the movie number 1, and then we'll go ahead and then we'll worry about Superman 2. But yeah, so you have this entire segment to where like the entire first like 10 minutes or so is just like this trial of General Zod and like the idea that he's a traitor to Krypton and the idea that like he needs to be imprisoned in the defensive zone. And then you have a segment where there is another kind of hearing to where it's kind of like, okay, well, Jor-El, who I think is played pretty good by Marlon Brando. I enjoy Marlon Brando's performance in these movies. He does, again, solid performance. Jor-El is trying to warn the people of Krypton of this council that Krypton is in danger of exploding and they need to evacuate the planet. And the council is like, "Oh, you're just you don't know what you're talking about. Like, like we've trusted your judgment up until." And that's another thing too is like there's a line where they say they're like, "Oh, we've trusted your judgment up to this point. You've never led us astray, and you've never been wrong." But oh yeah, now that you're saying that the planet is going to blow up and kill us all, nah, you miscalculated. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, if you say anything to the people of Krypton about this and you try to get them to evacuate, we're going to have you put on trial for treason. And it's kind of like, it's a little bit like, I get to an extent that you have to have kind of set the stage for like between General Zod and this council and Jor-El and his wife, that like you have to kind of set the stage that Krypton is kind of does its undoing, its own undoing, but at the same time, it's also kind of like, okay, like maybe this is explained more in the comics or the animated series, or different versions of Superman, but it's one of those scenarios where it's like, yeah, like when y'all do this, it feels more like you have to have the Council of Krypton just be idiots, because otherwise it's like, oh hey, the planet's gonna blow up. Like, oh crap, we need to evacuate. Oh, okay, that's the end of the movie. That right there, that's the end of the movie. They evacuate Krypton, and there's no need to send Superman off in a space shuttle, and so Kal-El never becomes Superman because the council is smart, and they're one person who was like, oh hey, yeah, like you need to make sure that like that we preserve the sanctity of Krypton. Like, hey, maybe the guy who was never wrong up to this point and is so trusted in society, maybe if he's telling us that we're in danger of an extinction level event, maybe we should listen. It's a little frustrating. It's a plot. It's kind of a plot hole. But yeah, and so you get this whole segment to where like Jor-El, promises to the council like, okay, I will not say anything to the people of Krypton, and me and my wife, like we will stay here on Earth, like we will stay here on Krypton, we will not try to flee, like like we will abide by the council. And so you get this whole segment where like they make the decision of they're gonna send baby Kal-El off to Earth because they want him to be safe. And like it's like, okay, we need to send him far enough away from Krypton to where when the planet does explode, it's not gonna have any chance of harming him. But at the same time, we need to make sure that he's somewhere to where he ends up somewhere where he can have a chance at life, where he can at least have a chance to live. And that works out pretty well. And then you actually get to the whole segment of Jonathan Martha Kent and Smallville, and it's a shorter segment than what the Krypton segment is. It's like about probably like 15 or so minutes, but still, it's one of those scenarios to where like you get that and you finish through that, and then after that you then have this whole journey of, okay, now Clark Kent has to take this crystal and go out into the Antarctic, and he has to find, he has to, build the Fortress of Solitude, and now he's built the Fortress of Solitude. Now he has to talk to the, like the holograms of, Jor-El, and get to see, like be told more about his heritage and stuff. But at the same time, it's also like it just takes a while to get going, and I don't know. I think if there was a cut of this movie that was just kind of like more to the point and just have like a little bit more of like, okay, we need to go ahead and show Krypton, we need to show Smallville, we need to show Fortress of Solitude, but we're here for Superman. Knock it out about 30 minutes or so. Get to Metropolis, get Lois Lane, Daily Planet, get Lex Luthor. And I think even that would have been something that could help this movie out a little bit. Like like if you're going to do things the way you're doing, of like at least intercut to like Lex at some point during like like before the Fortress of Solitude, and kind of like show like him starting to form his evil plan or something. But the way things are handled in the version we get is just like it takes a while to get going, and it's a little tedious. But overall, overall, I think Superman the movie is a solid superhero film. It's a very it's very iconic for where it is, and as much as I don't really enjoy the movie, I enjoy the movie itself. But is this gonna my biggest thing? Is this going to be a Superman movie that I ever return to? Is this going to be a Superman movie that I get enough out of it that I'm going to be like, you know what, I want to watch this again. As of right now, I don't see any potential of me watching this again in the future over a different Superman movie. And while I do respect it as one of the earliest foundations of comic book movies in general, because before this we had Batman the movie that was like a extended episode of the 1966 Adam West Batman TV show. Superman the movie from 1978 is undeniably important, and it set the stage for where now you're talking about Michael Keaton's Batman films with Tim Burton, or when we get to the early 2000s and we get to Blade, Blade 2, the Fox X-Men movies, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. When we get to the Dark Knight trilogy, its importance is something that cannot be denied. It is a very important movie. It is a very classic movie, and I would say at the bare minimum, give this at least one watch. If you've never seen Superman the movie, I would definitely say at least give this a one-time watch, because it is important. It is a movie that it does hold a significance that is something that is to this day. Like I said, they got ready to do the trailer for the first teaser trailer for Superman 2025 like a month ago, and their first thought was, let's retool and do our version of the John Williams score, because it's such an iconic score that of course it's going to be something that's going to resonate with fans. So yeah. If nothing else, give Superman the movie a first time watch. Let me know down below in the comment section below. Is this a movie that you have personally grown up with? What is your history with Superman in movies, TV shows, whatever? Do you have more of a a deep understanding of Superman in general? What does Christopher Reeve Superman mean to you? Do you have a favorite version of Superman? One thing I do plan on doing when the new James Gunn David Cornsweet movie comes out, I'm going to try and do a ranking of the live action versions of Superman, at least the movie versions. I can't say anything for Dean Cain or Tom Welling or any of them from the TV shows, because I just don't know if I'm going to have time to cover the TV shows as well as the movies. We will see. There might be some of the TV show reviews coming. Can't make any guarantees as of right now, but at bare minimum, I have a bunch of movies that are going to be coming out that I'm going to be doing reviews for, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I think this is a very solid film for what they were trying to do in the 1970s, and it absolutely holds up. For me personally, and my personal taste, it's not something that I know that I would immediately reach for in 2025. And so, yeah, like I said, let me know down below in the comment section below, what do you think of Superman the movie from 1978? We'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Talk to you later.